I don't want to put the cart before the horse. We don't have a strategy yet.
President Obama a little less than 2 hours ago. I'm Brett Baer in Washington. President Obama is pulling back the reins on talk of military action against ISIS terrorists inside Syria. The president made it clear a short time ago his priority is ISIS in Iraq, protecting U.S. personnel and assets there, and that a regional approach with allied help is required for anything else. He also called out Russia amid reports of new movements by Russian troops inside Ukraine. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon with what's happening inside Ukraine. Catherine Herridge here in the Bureau on the increasing global reach of ISIS. But we begin with Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry and the president's decision not to make a decision on ISIS. Good evening, Ed.
Good evening, Brett. And top White House aides right now are scrambling to clarify what the president said in that quote you played, that we do not have a strategy to deal with ISIS. Josh Earnest taking to Twitter to insist the president was explicit in saying he has a comprehensive plan long term to deal with the terror group. And yes, when it comes to Iraq, the president did say he has a military strategy. But when it comes to Syria, not so much. As ISIS militants today released gruesome photos to boast about at least another 150 executions, this time of Syrian soldiers, President Obama used a news conference to slam the brakes on growing momentum for an escalation of U.S. military action, openly admitting his strategy for airstrikes in Syria has not been fully developed.
I don't want to put the cart before the horse. We don't have a strategy yet. I think what I've seen in some of the news reports suggests that folks are getting a little further ahead of where we're at than we currently are. And I think that's not just my assessment, but the assessment of our military as well.
Then the president met with his national security team in the Situation Room, just like the beginning of the month when he was weighing U.S. airstrikes in Iraq. Now he's mulling whether to expand that air campaign across the border into Syria, which is in total chaos and has become a breeding ground for terrorists, some with Western passports, who may try to launch attacks here in the U.S.
This is as dangerous a threat matrix as I have ever seen in my time on the Intel Committee, which is about 10 years.
Yet over the last week, there's been a shift at the White House, from top aide Ben Rhodes teeing up possible airstrikes in Syria, while on Martha's Vineyard last Friday.
We're actively considering what's going to be necessary to deal with that threat, and we're not going to be restricted by borders.
To the president today, trying to make clear that airstrikes in Syria are not imminent, as he was pressed on why he has not presented a plan to the American people and sought authorization from Congress.
We need to make sure that we've got clear plans, that we're developing them. At that point, I will consult with Congress and make sure that their voices are heard.
That caution comes as the president faces deep skepticism on the left, with the New York Times editorial page declaring today of a Syria invasion, quote, "There are too many unanswered questions to make that decision now, and there has been far too little public discussion for Mr. Obama to expect Americans to rally behind what could be another costly military commitment." As for that public discussion, Senate Democrats like Tim Kaine and Chris Murphy are urging the president to seek a debate and votes on the use of force. Murphy declaring, quote, "The administration needs to come to Congress to outline its military objectives and seek specific authorization before we enter into a new war in the Middle East." That's not sitting well with some of the president's fellow Democrats, who fear a tough vote ahead of the midterms. One Democratic congressional aide telling the Hill newspaper, quote, "I think it's dumb. The less the president is in the news with anything right now, the better." Now, amid all of this turmoil, it turns out the president is doing more fundraising on Friday than we first thought. In addition to the already announced trip to Rhode Island to raise money for House Democrats, we now learn the president's going tomorrow to Westchester, New York for another fundraiser. Brett?
Ed Henry, live on the North Lawn. Ed, thank you. The threat that ISIS will export its brutal brand of terrorism to the U.S. is getting more and more attention. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge looks at the growing concern over Americans joining the cause.
A Somali American identified by a Minneapolis source as Abdi Rahman Mohammed is believed to be the second American killed this month fighting for ISIS. While not commenting on the specific case, a State Department spokeswoman confirmed new details about ISIS and its recruitment.
It's increased over the last 6 months. We've seen an increase in the use of Western passports.
Based on social media, Mohammed knew Douglas McCain, who was also from Minneapolis and also killed fighting with ISIS. These images were sent to McCain's family of his passport and dead body. Omar Jamal, who knew McCain, says at least 10 young men from the Somali community have been recruited.
Douglas McCain wasn't the first one, and unfortunately he won't be the last.
McCain went to school with Troy Castigar, who was showcased in a propaganda video for the al-Qaeda affiliate in East Africa. Castigar was killed in Somalia 2 years ago.
This is the real Disneyland.
The former chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee investigated radicalization in a series of congressional hearings and says there is a pattern.
There was clear and convincing evidence then that there was a pipeline from Minneapolis to Islamic Jihad overseas, and that people in the community knew about it and people in the community were covering it up.
Social media is the lifeblood of the new digital jihad. Earlier this year, a Florida man became a suicide bomber in Syria and destroyed his American passport as part of a farewell video. And while the administration labeled the Fort Hood massacre workplace violence, in a letter obtained by Fox News, the convicted shooter, Major Nidal Hassan, tells the ISIS leader al-Baghdadi that he wants to join the caliphate. Quote, "I formally and humbly request to be made a citizen of the Islamic State." Hassan's attorney said the letter underscores how much Hassan's life, actions, and mental thought process are driven by religious extremism.
In the last year, the Department of Justice has brought at least 5 prosecutions against Americans in Florida, California, Virginia, and North Carolina for trying to help terrorists, specifically in Iraq and Syria, Brett.
Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
And now to Ukraine. President Obama flatly ruled out any U.S. military action there. But he says Russian fingerprints are all over the continuing conflict, including today's reports of new movement into the country by Russian troops. And once again, the strongest rhetoric today about Russia came from the president's ambassador to the United Nations. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is at the Pentagon with what we know right now. Good evening, Jennifer.
Good evening, Brett. U.S. officials have been reluctant to go as far as Ukrainian officials and call Russian actions an invasion.
The violence is encouraged by Russia. The separatists are trained by Russia. They are armed by Russia. They are funded by Russia. Russia has deliberately and repeatedly violated the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine.
Satellite photos released by NATO show in stark terms the dramatic increase of Russian troops and heavy armor along Ukraine's border, a dramatic buildup from June 19th to August 20th. One image provided by Digital Globe shows 6 Russian artillery batteries facing Ukraine. Another shows Russian artillery establishing firing positions inside Ukraine near Krasnodar.
Russia has to stop lying and has to stop fueling this conflict.
As fighting flared, the UN Security Council met today in New York, and ambassadors from all 28 NATO countries will hold an emergency meeting on Friday with Ukrainian officials to discuss the developing situation. President Obama has invited Ukraine's president to the White House next month.
Due to Russian troops actually entering Ukrainian territory, I decided to cancel a visit to Turkey. The place of Ukraine's president is in Kiev today.
Ukraine's president met with Russian President Vladimir Putin for 2 hours in Minsk on Tuesday in what was described as a heated and tense exchange. Now, 2 days later, U.S. officials revealed that the latest intelligence shows up to 2,000 Russian troops actively fighting inside Ukraine's borders. This Russian separatist suggests there could be more.
We have never hidden from anybody the fact there are many Russians among us. Without their help, it would be very difficult for us to fight. There were around 3,000 to 4,000 of them.
New images also show Russian tanks inside Ukraine. The U.S. ambassador to Kiev sent the following tweet, quote, "Russia has also sent its newest air defense systems, including the SA-22, into eastern Ukraine and is now directly involved in the fighting." Ukraine's military announced on Tuesday its forces had captured 10 Russian paratroopers who had crossed the border. Their mothers back home in Moscow appealed for their return.
I beg you in Christ's name to give my child back to me. Bring him back alive.
Experts say Russia is now trying to open a third front farther south to divert Ukrainian forces from areas around Donetsk, where Ukraine has been successful in retaking territory lost to the separatists. The Russians seem to want access to the port at Mariupol, with the eventual goal of creating a land bridge from Russia to Crimea.
NATO's Secretary General has proposed placing a rapid reaction military force in Poland and the Baltics, a move bound to antagonize Russia's Vladimir Putin. This as German Chancellor Angela Merkel said the EU would meet soon to discuss further sanctions against Russia as the FBI investigates a widespread suspected cyber attack by Russian hackers against 7 of the top 15 U.S. banks. Brett.
Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. Up next, why both Democrats and Republicans are holding their breath for President Obama's immigration decision. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates across the country are covering tonight. Surf's up in Southern California. Take a look at this from Fox 11. They're all over it. Waves up to 15 feet are forecast in the Los Angeles area caused by Tropical Storm Marie turning off the Mexican coast. That powerful storm surge has damaged piers already, flooded coastal homes, and tossed heavy rocks from a seawall onto a road there. Fox 25 in Boston with the continuing search for a missing Air Force pilot. A Massachusetts Air National Guard F-15 fighter jet crashed yesterday in Western Virginia, I should say. Officials are not saying whether the pilot ejected or what caused that crash. And this is a live look at New York from Fox 5. The big story there tonight, the sister of Boston Marathon bombing suspect Johar Tsarnaev has been arrested for allegedly making a bomb threat. Police accuse Alina Tsarnaev of threatening to have her boyfriend's ex blown up. She turned herself in yesterday. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.